6 nights. 6 straight nights of American bombs falling on Iranian soil. And now, for the first time since this war exploded into the open, Iran has struck back at a country it had never touched before: Syria. Bahrain lit up with air raid sirens. Qatar intercepted missiles over its own capital. A child was hit by shrapnel in Doha. And in the deserts of eastern Syria, near a border crossing called Al-Tanf, Iranian missiles slammed into a facility the United States has used for years to watch its enemies. This is not de-escalation. This is not a war winding down. This is a war spreading, night after night, front after front, country after country being pulled into a fight that was supposed to be over weeks ago. As of Friday, July 17th, 2026, U.S. Central Command has confirmed the completion of its 6th consecutive night of airstrikes against Iran. Fighter jets, drones, and warships unleashed what CENTCOM called precision. Munitions on targets across the country, with the stated goal of degrading Iran's military capability and breaking its grip on the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important oil choke points on the planet. But Iran did not sit still. In the hours that followed, Tehran launched missiles and drones at Bahrain, Qatar, Jordan, Kuwait, and, in a major escalation, claimed to have hit American forces in Syria for the very first time in this entire conflict. Let that sink in for a moment. This war began as a fight over Iran's nuclear ambitions and its blockade threats in the Gulf. Now it has metastasized into a regional conflagration touching at least 7 countries: Iran, the United States, Bahrain, Qatar, Jordan, Kuwait, and Syria, with Iraq and Oman also reporting defensive measures against incoming fire. Sirens are going off in cities that have nothing to do with the original dispute. Civilians in Doha, in Manama, in Kuwait City are being told to shelter in place because of a war that started hundreds of miles away over uranium enrichment and shipping lanes. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Neither side is blinking. President Trump addressed the American public directly this week, insisting the war is going well, and that citizens would soon see what he called the fruits of that effort. At the very same time, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps was vowing that not a single drop of oil or gas would leave the region as long as U.S. operations near the Strait of Hormuz continued. 2 governments, 2 populations, locked into a spiral where every strike demands a counterstrike, and every counterstrike demands retaliation. This is the anatomy of a forever war, and it's happening right now in real time as you watch this. So how did we get here? Rewind just a few weeks. In late June, the United States and Iran actually sat down. Talks were held in Switzerland on June 22nd, and the 2 sides reportedly agreed to a 60-day negotiation window, an attempt to end hostilities through diplomacy rather than continued bloodshed. For a moment, there was hope, a pause, a chance that cooler heads would prevail. That window has now completely collapsed. Since those talks broke down, Iran says at least 38 of its people have been killed and more than 400 injured in the renewed American bombing campaign, numbers that include at least 8 people Iranian officials say died in just the most recent overnight strikes alone. The targets have shifted too, and this matters. In the earliest phases of this renewed campaign, American strikes were largely concentrated on military infrastructure, air defense systems, missile depots, command centers. But over these past 6 nights, the target list has crept outward. U.S. forces have now hit bridges, telecommunications networks, and railway systems in southern Iran. A bridge near Bandar-e-Kamir in Hormozgan province was struck, with local media reporting at least 7 deaths there alone. Several other bridges connected to Bandar Abbas, the coastal city that sits right on the Strait of Hormuz, were also hit in what analysts describe as a deliberate effort to sever the vital port city from the rest of the country. This is the moment we are in. A conflict that was contained to 2 countries just weeks ago has now pulled in the entire Gulf region. Air raid sirens in Bahrain, interceptions. Over Doha. A direct Iranian strike inside Syrian territory for the first time. And a warning from Tehran that the Strait of Hormuz, the artery through which roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply flows, is what they are calling an unbreakable red line. In the sections ahead, we are going to break down exactly what happened over these 6 nights, what Iran did in response, the human cost mounting on both sides, and where this dangerous spiral could be heading next. Because, make no mistake, what happens in the Strait of Hormuz in the coming days could ripple through gas prices, global markets, and geopolitical alliances far beyond the Middle East. Stay with us. Let's get into the details of exactly what the United States military did over these past 6 nights, because the scale and precision of this campaign tells you everything about the strategy Washington is pursuing. According to U.S. Central Command, the latest wave of strikes began at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday and concluded by 9:40 p.m. Eastern that same night, The sixth consecutive night, American forces have conducted sustained bombing operations against targets inside Iran. CENTCOM described the operation in a public statement, saying the strikes were intended to further degrade Iranian military capabilities for a sixth straight night. This wasn't a single strike or a symbolic show of force. This was a sustained, methodical campaign using fighter jets, drones, and naval assets simultaneously. What's striking about this particular round is where the bombs landed. Earlier phases of the renewed conflict focused heavily on the south of the country, but reporting indicates the U.S. military pushed its target zone farther north this week, with strikes reaching into areas surrounding Tehran, Iran's capital, for the first time in this latest chapter of the war. That is a significant shift. Striking near the capital sends an unmistakable political message that no part of the country, not even the seat of government, is considered off limits. At the same time, American forces also engaged Iranian naval activity directly. U.S. forces reportedly fired on a vessel that Washington accused of attempting to break the naval blockade currently in place around Iran. This blockade is central to the entire strategic picture here. The United States is not just bombing targets, it is actively trying to choke off Iran's ability to move goods, particularly oil, through the sea. CENTCOM has framed its operations in the Strait of Hormuz as protecting freedom of navigation for all vessels, except those attempting to violate that blockade. Language that makes clear the U.S. sees maritime control as a central war objective, not a side effect of the bombing campaign. The infrastructure targeting has also escalated considerably. Iranian bridges in the south of the country have taken direct hits, particularly those connected to Bandar Abbas, a critical port city sitting directly on the Strait of Hormuz. By cutting the bridges linking Bandar Abbas to the interior of the country, the U.S. campaign appears aimed at isolating the port itself, crippling Iran's ability to move military supplies and possibly civilian goods in and out of that strategic coastal hub. Iran's semi-official Fars news agency reported that these bridge strikes caused severe damage to the routes connecting the port to the rest of Iran. CENTCOM also announced it had destroyed a surveillance tower that Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps had been using to track commercial and military vessel movements through the strait, a direct hit on Iran's ability to monitor and therefore threaten ships transiting through those waters. In response, Iran issued a pointed warning through Fars news agency. If the United States continues targeting infrastructure connected to the strait, Tehran could retaliate by striking what it called a network of key ports across Gulf states. That is a serious escalation threat, one that would put not just Iranian infrastructure, but the ports of Gulf allies directly in the crosshairs. There's also a telling detail buried in the broader picture. The U.S. military confirmed it had completed a full withdrawal from the Al-Tanf garrison in Syria back in February, more than a decade after establishing a presence there as part of a wider drawdown to a smaller American footprint in the country. Al-Tanf had long served a specific strategic purpose. It sat along a key smuggling corridor used to move Iranian weapons into Syria and onward to Hezbollah in Lebanon. The garrison's closure earlier this year makes Iran's decision to strike near that same location now even more layered, since it appears aim less at active American troop concentrations and more at a symbolically significant former U.S. military foothold, and at what Iran describes as a still active Special Operations Command presence in the area. President Trump has taken every opportunity to frame this campaign as an unambiguous success. In a primetime address to the American public on Thursday, he told citizens directly that the United States is winning big in Iran, promising that people would see the results of that effort very, very shortly. He has also issued a specific threat looking ahead. If Iran continues refusing to return to the negotiating table, Trump says the U.S. will target the country's bridges and power plants next week, an explicit signal that the campaign is prepared to escalate further into Iran's civilian-adjacent energy and transportation infrastructure if Tehran doesn't yield. But experts are raising red flags about where this is all heading. Ian Lesser, a distinguished fellow holding a prominent position at the German Marshall Fund, a Washington-based think tank, has pointed to a real risk that the United States and Iran are becoming entangled in what he termed a forever war, a conflict with no clear off-ramp, expanding in scope with each passing night rather than contracting toward resolution. That's the core tension defined by the sixth night of strikes, a U.S. campaign that keeps widening its target list, an Iranian government refusing to fold, and a growing list of neighboring countries getting pulled into the crossfire whether they asked for it or not. In the next section, we turn to Iran's side of this equation. The retaliation, the new fronts it opened, and why striking Syria for the first time changes the entire character of this war. Now let's talk about Iran's response, because this is where the conflict took its most dramatic turn yet. For the first time since the United States and Israel jointly launched this war against Iran earlier in the year, Iranian forces struck inside Syrian territory. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps claimed it carried out what it called a surprise attack on a U.S. Special Operations Command Center located at Al-Tanf, near Syria's southeastern border region with Iraq and Jordan. According to Iran's state broadcaster, the IRGC framed this strike as retaliation for an American attack, it says, took place near a children's cancer hospital in Iranshar, a city in southeastern Iran, in which Iranian soldiers were killed. It's worth pausing on that justification, because regardless of how the facts ultimately shake out, the messaging itself is significant. Iran is deliberately framing its expansion into Syrian territory as a direct, proportionate response to an atrocity, a strike near a children's hospital, rather, than as an unprovoked widening of the war. That's a narrative choice clearly designed to shape how the Iranian public and the broader region perceives this new front. However, it's important to note that a Syrian source, along with the U.S. military itself, has denied Iran's claim of an attack on any American base inside Syria. As of this reporting, that specific claim remains disputed, even as the broader picture of an expanding multi-front war around it is not in question. Beyond Syria, Iran conducted what appear to be its largest regional strikes since ceasefire talks with the United States collapsed. Qatar, Kuwait, and Jordan all came under direct Iranian fire. Qatar in particular found itself targeted for a second time in the same day. Its defense ministry confirmed it intercepted a number of air attacks on Friday morning local time, with a government security alert sent directly to residents' mobile phones and loud explosions heard across the capital, Doha. Tragically, a child was injured by falling shrapnel from one of the intercepted strikes, according to Qatar's Interior Ministry, which confirmed the child was receiving necessary medical care. As of the latest reporting, Iran has not claimed responsibility for that particular strike on Qatar,